Our project today is a JB4 install into an F82 M4. What a great car, and this just takes that car to the next level. This project is in collaboration with Mike of Extreme Powerhouse and really is a quick and simple, relatively simple way of increasing the horsepower in any car that you have, let alone something as magnificent as an M4. This is a little more complicated than some of the other JB4 installs because this inherently has the electronic wastegate connections already included, and there are two of them because the M4 is a twin turbo. Now, I've read in some places and seen some of the other information where people don't use the wastegate connections. They either tuck them away, don't plug them in. And on a couple of occasions, I've actually even seen people say just cut them off. Well, I can understand why they would say that because unless you're at currently map 7 or higher, they do you no good at all. But at the same time, plugging them in is such a simple thing to do. We're just going to remove one of the intakes on one side to be able to get to both connections. I don't know why you wouldn't do it, let alone cut those plugs off. So I'm going to show, in this case, I'm going to show the install plugging both of the electronic wastegates in because I see it as the right thing to do, and plus it'll set you up potentially for the future as you build through the improvements you make to your car. Alright, let's go out to the garage. Alright, we have the JB4 box. Now, yours may look a little bit different if you have the plastic housing. This is the upgraded aluminum housing. So with the plastic housing, you have to take a tool and very gently pry it apart. In this case, it's actually screwed together. And this is a, if I can read my own tools here, so this is a T15 or Torx 15. I've actually got the little security one here as well. I don't believe it takes that, so it's a T15 Torx to get these out. So just take these out and then the cover will come off. So we're going to install the Bluetooth module, which candidly I don't know why you'd buy one of these without it. The convenience of being able to change on the fly, move off your phone, do off the phone, get logging, do updates and all those sort of things, to me it's kind of a no-brainer on why you wouldn't buy it. So it's really worth it to me. It's a little bit of additional cost. Obviously you've got to buy the Bluetooth module separately. You have to buy the client for your phone separately. But ultimately I really think it's worth it. I've been able to change maps directly off my phone. I've been able to look at logging, I've been able to look at other information directly off my phone. I don't know why you wouldn't use it. I think this is one of the strongest advantages that JB has entirely. Okay, so with the Bluetooth module, once you have the cover off, be careful with the circuit board. I've never shorted a circuit board out in all the years I've worked on computers, but don't have this one be the first. So make sure you don't have any static electricity, anything else like that. You've got your adapter or plug that just goes in here. Now the kit comes with a couple of small screws to attach this, and I would definitely use them because you don't want this plug wiggling loose. I really don't see how it could wiggle loose, but at the same time you don't want to take that risk, right? So let me just change tools here really quick. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to attach this plug. Once the plug is attached, the other thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to connect the power for this adapter to the board itself. It's not that hard, but we'll get that done. Okay, so that's connected and that's good to go. And there's a little gap right here where the cable comes out. And then also on your case, whether you've got the plastic one or this hardened aluminum one, there's a little rubber plug you'll want to take out, and that's where this cord will feed out of once the lid's back on. Now you'll see, and I'm going to pull away the bottom here for a second, you'll see we've got our connection here. What we're going to do is we're going to take our blue wire and feed it through this little rubber grommet. So what you want to do is make a little bit of a gap so you can feed it through. It's a good thing that it's a tight connection, that way you don't have to worry about weather or any water getting in. So as you can see now, the blue wire is now fed through. We're going to tap power. Now you'll see there's two red power lines here going in. It doesn't matter which one you use. So you've got your tap. Take the gray plug and fit that around one of the red power lines in this existing plug. I usually put it about halfway in, about here. That way it shouldn't foul with any of the other pieces. take your connector, your tap, and then screw it back down onto this gray plug. And you'll see that it should pierce that red line, and screw it in firmly. It should pierce that red line and make a connection. There. Now, the blue line then comes in through the top of the other end, the red end. It comes in and just screws right in place. Now what I always try to do when I do this is once I've got this connected, it's pretty firm, I give it a good tug. The blue is intact, so it's not backing its way out. The tap on the other end is definitely in and secure, so it's good to go. Then all we have to do is put it back in the case. So just lay the board back in, and as you can see, it's just grooved to fit. Make sure your gray cable is set and you took that little rubber plug out. Now our tap here is going to be a little bit tighter than you see in, I think, the plastic case, just due to space, but we'll make sure that this fits in really well. Just set down nice and firmly here. I'm offset a little bit. Once we get that, we'll just screw it in from the bottom and we'll be good to go. Okay, next steps are going to be installing the JB4 into the car itself. Okay, something that's really important to do before you do project work like this is pull your negative post on your battery. Normally I would also say walk your key away from your car, but in this case it's not as important because the battery is going to be pulled, everything's going to be turned off. So I'll show you really quickly on how to pull the negative battery post. We're looking into the trunk here, so you're on the right hand side of your trunk. You can pull this cover and you'll see your battery back here. So the red one obviously is your positive, the brown is the negative. The negative you don't have to worry about grounding out on anything because it is the ground. I'm always really careful dealing with batteries. I've seen people make some mistakes and it always makes me a little nervous, candidly. So it should be a 10mm socket, which is, may not be in this case, or I'm just not able to reach. Yep, it's 10mm. Okay, so my head's probably in the way right at the moment, but all I'm doing is just undoing the nut on the ground post, the brown ground post on your battery. Just release that, pull the ground post up and away, and then make sure to tuck the cable away off on one side. So you make sure it's off and away from the battery entirely. It won't accidentally come back and touch your ground post. Don't just pull it and let it sit there. Pull it up and away and tuck it away so all the power in your car is pulled. Last thing you want to do, especially dealing with the connections we've got for the MCU up underneath the hood, is have power in the car at the time. Okay, let's move back to the hood. Okay, so here we are underneath the hood. What we need to do first, now the one thing I want to caution, and something that I'm waiting on a little bit right now, is that the motor is still really warm. So don't burn yourself, take your time. If you can, let your car cool down completely before you do this work. That way you don't potentially touch anything, burn yourself, all those sort of things. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to pull these two upper covers. These are just little twist nuts. They're 10mm. You can use a 10mm socket just to turn them 45 degrees usually to the left, and they're on this on both sides. And then these covers will come off. So you just do that, and this will come up, and that's off. So just set it safely aside. Grab the other one, and it should come off. This peg is a little tight. So this one's got a peg on this side. There we go, and it's off. So both of those are out so we can get to the spaces. So our JB4 is going to go up here underneath this space here, and we're going to be running the ODBC cable through the other side, so you have to have these covers off first to be able to do this work. Now normally I would also caution to be really careful. This is your positive battery post right here, and in the instructions from Burger, they talk about taping this off. You can definitely do that, and I'm probably going to do that just to follow their directions. I'm going to tape off the contact. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have pulled the ground post on the battery, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue. But again, it's better to be safe than sorry in all of these things. So now that those covers are off, I'm going to tape that post off, and we're going to start to lay out the JB4 cabling, and I'll show how that works. Okay, so what we're actually going to do, we're going to take an extra step in this case. So I've started to lay the JB4 out where all the connectors will go. One of the things we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get to a connector underneath this intake right here. I think it would be possible to kind of wiggle and worm your way to get this intake out without taking your carbon strut off. I think it's possible, but I don't really see a reason to go through that amount of trouble when all you have to do is pull 8 different bolts and the strut just comes straight out. It doesn't affect alignment at all. It doesn't affect anything that way. So it's an easy takeout. They're 13 millimeter bolts. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you pull each one of those, and then this piece will lift and will just slide out. It'll slide out underneath your weather protector on either side, and it'll slide straight out. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pull out this carbon strut and have this out of place so we can actually get this left intake out, because we have to get to the sensor that's underneath it. So for me, it seems like a very logical thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through getting all of this taken out. Then I'll show you the next steps as we lay the JB4 out. Okay, so I've pulled the carbon strut off. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. You've got long bolts across the back, all 13 millimeter all the way around. But there's a couple of things I really want to point out. So when you put it back together, it's just in the forefront of your mind. You've got long bolts in the back. The 2 here in the front are short. And you've got a small one here that's actually 10 millimeter. And I think this is more just keeping this tank in place than it is actually adding any real structural support. But this is a 10 millimeter bolt here. So when you set all these aside, you shouldn't mix them up because the longs are in the back and the 2 shorts are in the front. You got a 10 millimeter here, so you should be good to go. Now the other thing that I've also done is I've loosened the collar here, and you've got what should be your MAF sensor right here, which again has a small little pressure clip that you pull up on, and the clip comes away. Now the one thing I want to stress with this, with any of these clips, you really want to be gentle. So as you pry up on them, if you broke one of these, it would be bad. I don't really want to know what would happen if you broke one of these on what you'd have to do to make it right. So as you go through this, make sure that you use a very small screwdriver or a small pick to lift the little plastic lever and then gently work these plugs off, because as we pull all the rest of these plugs off, you're going to have to be really careful about it. So the engine's also cool enough now that I think we can really kind of work with it. It's not cold, but we're not going to burn ourselves anymore. So I'm going to pull the intake on this side, or the air filter and intake on this side. Now, as you look at these connections, I've laid the cables out already. So this is going to be for the connector that's up in the cabin. So I'm just going to lay this out. We've got our connector over here, which we call our rainbow connector, which is over here on our intake. There's another one back behind here that's going to be a little hard to show, and I'll show it separately and then really zoom in to try to show it. I mean, I've laid the rest of my cables out on where they're going to go. So we'll walk through each one of those as we get them connected. So like I said, the next thing I'm going to do is this intake, which I've loosened the collar and it just lifts. It's on posts down here, down below, and it just lifts up and away as the pipe comes away. So we're going to pull this out so we can get to the sensor that's underneath it. So as I do each sensor, I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to zoom in and show how they all connect. Okay, so I've removed the intake, as you can see here. This is where I would connect, and it just lifts off. There's a couple of things I want to point out while we're here. First of all, if you see this rubber grommet, there's another right, and I pan down gently, right here. Be careful, because when I pulled the intake off, this grommet came out, because it just pulls out of a little C-shaped piece of metal, and actually fell down. I was really lucky to be able to find it super simply. So what we're going to be looking at right here is our 2 electronic wastegates. So our JB4 has the electronic wastegate adaptation, or cables to plug in, especially for running MAP 6 or higher. Now, at this point, there's no plan to run as high as MAP 6, but I don't see any reason not to install the cables while we're here. There are 2 electronic wastegate cables. It doesn't matter which one goes in either position. This is the first position right here, and as you can see where we are in the motor, here we are where the intake is. Here's where the intake has come out. Here's our first wastegate sensor right there, highlighted in the flashlight. And then I'm going to carefully scroll back. And as you'll see, highlighted underneath this metal pipe right here, you'll see the other wastegate. So we'll pull these plugs and install where you plug the original into the adapter and then plug the cable into the original position where it should go. So I don't see any reason not to do that work. So I'm going to get that done, then I'll show you when it's done. So both electronic wastegate connectors are connected. So let's talk about this really quickly. Unless you're running MAP 7 or higher, you don't necessarily need these. And there's lots of advice. You can just take these cables and tuck them away. You can set them off somewhere. Some people have even recommended cutting them off. I'm going to say take the extra 10-15 minutes and plug them in. You may never use them, but if you're going to do this, you might as well do it right from the start. So here's the original cable plugged into the adapter, and I'm going to tuck this away neatly. And then here is plugged in right here for one wastegate. Then as we look towards the back, this one is a little bit harder to reach, as you can see, and I'm going to pull my arm out of the way so it's not in the way. You can see the other plug here. This plug, you push back and away, and it will come away from the plug. I've added it to the adapter here, and then you can see where I've plugged it back in down here. Now, I'm going to make sure all of these cables are safely tucked away. There's a lot, I mean, this motor's still warm, so you can imagine what it's like when it's running. So I'm going to make sure that all of these cables are tucked safely away as far as they can be from any heat sources, because the last thing you want to do is melt cables or cause some kind of problem. So I'll make sure that that's all nice and neat and clean when I do the final installation and get it all cleaned up. So let's move on to the connection at the end of the fuel rail. So we're now looking at the back of the motor, and we're looking at the sensor on the fuel rail. So this is a little hard to see. You can see it highlighted right there. Getting to the locking tab on this sensor is a little difficult. So I'm going to show this in stages as we go through. Here's the adapter that's going to go on. So you can see this is the plug that you're trying to remove. So it's currently plugged in like this in this orientation, so you've got to take it and back the original out, plug it in here, and get this plugged into place. Now there is some advice where you can potentially take this reservoir off or move it to get it out of the way to give you a little more room. We're going to start by actually trying to do it and keep this reservoir in place to hopefully save the time from having to do that. If we have to, we'll take it out. All right, so let's get this off. Gently again, you've got to lift the tab on it, back the plug off, and get it into the adapter plug. Okay, so we've done a couple of things here. So first of all, if you notice that this reservoir is up a little bit, there's two Torx bolts that would pull just to gain a little bit of additional room. Now, the adapter is plugged into this plug that goes into the fuel rail because I didn't want to lose the plug once I got it off. But I want to share how I got it off. So here's the new plug, but I can use this as an example of what we did. It's in this orientation, which is a problem because that puts the lock on the bottom. So what I did in this case was, it's got a little flip latch. I put a flat bladed screwdriver. So if this is the original plug, again, plugged into the end of the fuel rail right here, I put a long bladed screwdriver down into this ridge so I could apply a little bit of pressure. And then with this reservoir being held up, I was able to get one hand in and under and was able to pry up on the little tab, all while putting a little bit of pressure on the screwdriver to back this plug out, and it came out. So once I used that technique, it wasn't that hard. I had an additional set of hands, which was really nice to hold this reservoir up and out of the way. You could potentially prop it up or do some other things to give yourself just an extra couple of inches. This is you can see the end of the fuel rail right here in the sensor. In some of the guides I've seen, they actually said that you can take a wrench and rotate the entire sensor to get to the lock. And I will admit I'm not comfortable doing that because I don't know if the sensor is under a certain torque. I don't know if it has to be in some exact position or the exact specifics of it. So if I can get away with not changing that, I'm not going to. And once I use that technique of using a long, thin flat-bladed screwdriver here at a 45-degree angle, kind of on this outer ridge. I got my fingers underneath and lifted the tab, and with that pressure from the screwdriver, it came right off. I don't feel that I need to do anything but lift this reservoir to get it out of the way. Now, obviously, I've still got to plug this in, but I wanted to be able to keep this out long enough to use this as an example of what exactly I did and how I got that plug off. Now it's going to be a matter of just reaching back in there, plugging it back in the same orientation, again with the lock underneath. It's keyed, so it can only go one way, so you can't plug it in the wrong way. But this is the best way to show you how to do this. So I'll get this plugged in, and we're going to move on to the next sensor. Okay, so now we're going for the sensor that's on the other side of the same reservoir, the one we just lifted. It's a little difficult to see and a little difficult to get to. Maybe about equally as difficult to get to as the one on the fuel rail, but maybe not. So what you're looking at right now is actually the sensor plug, because I already have the cable out. I reached in to show the example of how to pull the plug off, and it came right off for me. So the plug's currently off, and I thought plugging it back in just for the video is kind of silly. So the plug will be plugged in towards the cabin with the back of the plug towards the motor. So on the left, you'll lift the little tab that'll be on the right side of the plug and pull it towards the motor. So pull it towards the left and it'll unplug. And you'll do the same thing that you've done before, where you'll take the original plug, plug it into the adapter, and plug this in place. And it'll plug in this orientation with the lock on top. It'll plug in this orientation into the sensor down below. So like I said, I've already got it out. So, and you can see I've got the original plug, if I can show it right there. So there you can see the original plug is loose. So that's going to go into the adapter, and then this will go in its place. And then we'll move on to the map sensor next. Okay, so the plug is in place. So I just wanted to show it in the correct orientation with the plug in and the lock is on. Make sure whenever you put these plugs in, you get a good solid click as they go into place. Sometimes with these gray locks, the plug will be always in, and it will be all the way in, and you have to press on the lock a little bit and you'll hear it click. So the other thing I believe in is good cable management. So I've got the JB4 sitting over there. It's not secure yet because I still want to have a little bit of cable play, but I've got it in the orientation I want it to be in. I've got the cables routed out through the channel right there and have them routed out and down. And this one that's on top right now will route more cleanly in a moment. That'll actually be up and behind this reservoir. But make sure that when you route your cables that they route cleanly and away and they're not stuck in anything, they're not going to get burnt or overheated, because especially things like the turbo here, it's pretty darn warm. So, all right, so now we're going to move on to our sensor here and our ODBC connector, and we're almost done. Okay, here we are at the last sensor. I've pulled the original off. Again, you put in a flat bladed screwdriver or a pick, you lift gently and press downward. The original plug will come off. I've now added it to the adapter here. And then here is our plug that will go back into that sensor. So what you'll want to do, again, is make sure that you get this into place and plug it in here. Orientation is lock is on the outside here. Press it up until you get a good solid click, and if need be, press up on the locking latch to make sure that it's in place and you get a good solid click. We'll show the ODBC connector next. All right, so what I'm going to try to show next is very hard to show. I'm now showing the footwell of the driver's side, and it's very difficult to show on the camera, but when you stick your head under here, it's very easy to see. And I'm going to try to go slowly, but there are two 10mm bolts, or excuse me, 10mm nuts. There's one right over here, and there's one on the other side that when you take those out, this kick panel will drop down. You need to drop this down so you can run the OBD cable through the firewall and plug it into the port that's right here. So you just pull these two nuts and this panel will come down. It's just a little bit hard to show, but I wanted to make sure you saw it. So we're going to run the cable through this little access port right here. Now, here's where the advantage that the automatic transmission folks like the M4 and others have over the manual transmissions. The manual transmission has a big fatty hose that goes right through that port right there, and it is an incredible pain. In this case, all we have to do is just back that plug straight out, and you can use a long bladed tool like a screwdriver, or in this case I'm probably going to use an extension, a wrench extension, to just push that plug out of place to run that cable through that hole. And I'll show you what we do once we get there. So what I have is, this is that little black plug that fits into the firewall hole. What I've done is I've cut a little plus in it because I'm going to feed the end of the plug of the OBD cable through this and then fit this back into place, because the last thing I want is this open plug through the firewall. I don't necessarily think it'd be a problem, but let's make sure that it's not. So the ODB cable is up and through. Like I said, I fed or threaded that little rubber grommet through this cable through and fed it all the way down and plugged it back into place back here. It's a little difficult to get in place, but I think it's worth the effort. The other thing that I've done is I've made sure to feed the cable up nicely to get up to this point. You can see that this is the run that comes over from the JB4, and I've connected it here. So once this is connected, I'm going to tuck all this down and away and make sure that I've got good cable management here. So I'm an old IT guy, so when I talk about cable management, maybe it's coming from a different place, but I really believe that you should make sure that things aren't rattling, rubbing, getting into places where they're going to get hurt. Now, the other thing that I do in this case with this particular plug, and maybe it's just me I always use a little bit of electrical tape and wrap this plug to make sure that it stays in place. Now the lock seems to be pretty secure, but the other thing it'll do is that if you get a little bit of moisture in here, that sort of thing, this will just help protect that plug a little bit more. So now I'm going to tuck all this away and make sure that this is all nice and neat and clean, but there's no problem. It's not going to rub against anything like that. So our cables are good to go here. All right, so let's do one last walkthrough to make sure that everything is correct, because the last thing you want to do is get everything put back together, plug your car in, and have it throw error codes, or generally just be a pain. So our ODB connector is up through the firewall. I've actually plugged it in to the OBD adapter that's there in the footwell. I still need to put that kick panel back on, but the cables are all connected. We look at our infamous rainbow connector here. It's on and solid. We go back to our connector on this side, on the other side of this reservoir. It is in, and we made sure that it clicked and it was in. Now we also did, if you remember correctly, we also loosened this reservoir and we pulled the two Torx bolts right here. So those have been put back and this reservoir is secure. We've got the sensor at the end of the fuel rail that we went through, and we made sure that that was definitely solid when we were done before. And then as we look down here, we look at our two wastegate sensors, this one here that we did originally, and aha, see, it was good to check. So in this case, the lock was actually out a little bit, so I pressed on it to make sure that it's solid and in and clicked. And then we've also got the back one back there, which I'm also going to check the lock on that as well. I just don't want my arm in the way, but I'm going to make sure that that's in and solid as well. So that's good. The last stage that we're going to do is we're going to secure the JB4. I'm going to put a strip of 3M double-sided tape on this side to secure it to the bottom side of this, and then I'm going to zip tie it as well, and I'll show that when I'm done. So let's do one last walkthrough here. I've put the engine, this decorative engine cover back on because it could go back on. I don't have the two upper covers back on yet because I wanted to show one last walkthrough of everything that we've done. So the JB4 is on with double-sided tape and secured and zip tied to that strut. We've got good clean cable management out through the port and up and over the top of the motor. We know that both of our wastegate connectors are good. The intake is back installed. I don't have the carbon fiber strut back on yet, or that support back on yet, but that's fine. We'll do that in a few minutes. We've got our fuel rail plug on. We've got our sensor underneath the tank there on. We've got our infamous rainbow connector here on. Everything's all clicked on and solid. Our ODB connector is here, and we taped it. It's secured with good cable management underneath. We've got our rubber plug, our cover back in place, and it's plugged in back with the kick panel, and the kick panel's installed. So at this point, all you need to do is reconnect the ground post on your battery, make sure that you've got all your covers back on, and then you're ready to fire your car up, check for any codes, and you're good to go. Back from a successful test drive with the JB4 installed into the M4. What an amazing car, and you can just feel how this takes it one step further. A couple of things on the last bit of cleanup. When you reinstall the carbon fiber strut, make sure to do it evenly. It's not something that matters for your suspension, but I would make sure, as far as alignment, but I would make sure that it's in and in evenly. So when I put all the bolts back in, again, the long ones in the back, the two short ones in the front, and the 10mm that attaches to the reservoir, that I put them all in firmly and evenly all the way around. I didn't crank all the way down on just one side and then work my way around. I got them all in and then worked through them all again. And it really is just kind of snug tight, because when the amount of pressure that it took to get them out is what I feel I put back on. So you should be just fine there. I also, of course, plug the battery back in. You're going to lose the time on your car and a few of your settings when you pull your power. But again, never install something like a JB4 or something similar with your power on. The drive was incredible. It just takes I'm blown away at what an incredible car that is, and what a great product this is. Thank you again to Mike of Extreme Powerhouse. What a pleasure to work with Burger Tuning's JB4 for the M4. I would run on map 1 to start with, depending on your setup. Go ahead and read all the forums and read all the information on what map that you choose to run with your car. Thank you again to Mike. If you like what you've seen, please make sure to click like, click subscribe. I'm putting out videos all the time for different models of car, and thank you so much.